Well, joining me from the House of Commons is Debbie Abrahams, the Shadow Work and Pensions Minister, and here in the studio, Ed Davies, who's Policy Director at the Conservative-leaning think tank, the Centre for Social Justice. Debbie Abrahams, let me start with you. Should we be more worried about absolute poverty, so people on the breadline, or relative poverty, so that people who can't afford perhaps what the average person can?
Well, both measures are very important. That's why we do have a number of measures. There's also severe poverty, which we haven't talked about. But what this report shows and adds to the reports, for example, from the Child Poverty Action Group, is that poverty is getting worse.
Well, except if you're talking about absolute poverty, though. The government says that's actually getting rather better. Is that cause for celebration?
Of course, any moves away from absolute poverty is absolutely something that we would support, and it relates to a baseline figure back in 2002, I think it was. But relative poverty is about the here and the now, and what this report shows is that 400,000 more children, 300,000 more pensioners are living in poverty, so they can't afford the daily things that you need to live an ordinary life.
OK, let me put that to Ed Davies. I mean, that is a worry, isn't it, that people can't afford what the average person can afford?
I mean, the first thing to say is that, actually, if I had my way, poverty would be at the top of every news bulletin, in the front of every newspaper, and it would be forefront of all our national conversation.
So you're concerned about both measures?
And so, actually, what we have here is a fantastically helpful conversation about poverty, getting it up the agenda. But, and there is a but here, the relative measure of poverty is a problem. And it does mean that, although this is a very welcome report and a really welcome conversation to have, we are talking about the wrong things.
Well, are we? Because, I mean, if you look at a couple with two children, they'll be living on £400 a week after their rent and mortgage. How would you manage on that?
The problem is that if we look at it through this relative measure, it creates two issues. So what you have is
But answer me that question. 400 quid a week, I mean, does that strike you as poverty or not?
But there's no denying that there is poverty in this country, and absolutely we should talk about it. But the problem is, if we just view it through a relative income measure, firstly, it's open to very arbitrary changes. You know, you introduce a national living wage and more people are in poverty, which is clearly absurd. You have a recession and more people come out of poverty. But secondly, the problem is people's problems are social and complex, not just financial. So if we have a purely financial measure like that, we're never going to get to grips with the causes of poverty.
Debbie Abrahams?
I have no problem about looking at the causes of poverty, but at the end of the day, you're in poverty because you don't have enough money, and we can't forget that. This is an internationally recognised measure. I know the government is very keen, and the CSJ have a close relationship with the government, very keen to try and change the measures and shift the argument in that way, but this is about people not having enough money to eat, to heat, or to enable them to have a decent home.
And Ed Davies, that's a lot of people are in work and in poverty. 1 in 8, the report says, 1 in 8 workers are in poverty. That's 3.7 million people. I mean, that's a terrible indictment, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, though, that you make, is that actually we need to talk about work and things like that, not just income. So in work, actually, there is a really good news story that more people are in work than ever. But, as you say, there is a problem about progressing in work. There's about skills and productivity. And so actually, to change this, what we need is not just to give out more money necessarily, to make sure we're doing the right things around skills and education and helping people actually reach their potential in life.
Debbie Abrahams, do you also need to end the benefits freeze? Would you,
Absolutely.
if you come into...
We've said that, we said that back in the general election.
Well, you were rather confused about that, though, weren't you? Because Jeremy Corbyn promised it and then retracted it. It was rather a muddle.
Not at all. It might have been confused in terms of how it was reported, but we were always very clear from our side of the question. So this is about making sure, yes, that we look at the long-term issues that can contribute to poverty, which do include skills, that do include education. That's why we had a fantastic offer around our National Education Service from cradle to grave. But it is also about what do we do for the here and now. It's no good saying, right, go and get yourself educated, and in a few years you can get a better job. We know that 4 out of 5 people on low-paid jobs now will be in low-paid jobs in the next 10 years. We need to do something urgently about the here and now, so children are not going to be brought up into poverty and it affect the rest of their lives.
Ed Davies, end the benefits freeze, increase the minimum wage. What would you do in the here and now? I
mean, in the here and now, I'd very happily see a lot more generosity. Universal credits had a lot of publicity recently, and one thing that you constantly heard from people is that the principles are right. And we fully get behind that and think, actually, invest in UC, put the money into work allowances, put the money so that actually work pays. That's a really important principle and something that I would absolutely change tomorrow.
Quite a lot of agreement here. Ed Davies and Debbie Abrahams, thank you very much.
Thank you.
John.